I decided to do this webinar to talk about the reasons for the capital raise and also the mechanisms of flow-through funding, which is quite confusing. It seems it was misunderstood by us for a long time, I think, and then it seems to be misunderstood by a few shareholders, judging by some of the creative emails I've received over the last week or so. And also I thought I'd give you an update on our activities on site, and having just returned from 3 weeks in Canada, there's a lot happening on the ground. So firstly, to talk about the reasons for the capital raise. Well, as many of you will know, we had, as of last week, around $38 million in the bank. 8 of that was flow-through funding from previous raise, and 30 million was hard dollars. And I'll talk about that distinction in a moment. We're spending, with the drilling we're doing at the moment, roughly $3.5 million a month. And as most of you will be aware, we're intending on putting out our globally significant maiden resource in the first quarter of next year. Now, with the spend rate and the date when the resource is due out, around that time we'll be down to roughly $20 million, give or take. And the danger that we perceived is that we put out a globally significant resource. Now, the market may or may not be still in a bad condition by then, but if we're down around $20 million, the market could well be expecting us to raise money on the back of that resource, and therefore it might fall completely flat. And we think that would be a terrible scenario. We want, as we publish this globally significant resource, we want Winsome shareholders to really realise the value that we have in these assets. So that was the first reason we decided to raise some more money now. It gives us complete freedom for the next 12 months, regardless of market conditions, to pursue our aggressive drilling program that's occurring on site now. The second reason is that flow-through funding is seasonal, as in it's not available all of the time. And I'll talk about the flow-through funding mechanism in a moment. But basically, the 30 million Canadian became available now, and there's a good chance that it won't be available early next year if we were to do a raise then, or at any other time during the year. It's particularly available now because it comes from high net worth individuals who wish to make charitable donations, and the Canadians have their tax year on the calendar year. So it's coming to the end of their tax year and they're thinking about these donations, hence the availability now. So again, when money's available, and given the previous reason I just gave, we thought it a great idea to raise money. So as of late this week, when the financing closes, we'll have around 70 million Australian in the bank. And in a rough market, when most companies are being cautious with their money and thinking about, perhaps worrying about where their next capital raise is going to come from, we can confidently keep pushing ahead with our drilling and exploration programs, so that when the market turns, we'll be much more advanced than our peers. Now, onto the flow-through funding. It's a very, to us in Australia, it seems like an unusual scheme, but it was set up about 20 years ago by the Canadian government in order to encourage early stage exploration. And I'll use the rough numbers that we just did our capital raise on to illustrate how it works. Now, if we wish to raise 30 million Canadian, we approach a flow-through provider in Canada. In this case, it was Pear Tree Securities. And Pear Tree, and we tell them that we'd like to raise $30 million. They then go out to their network of donors, mostly high net worth individuals, and determine whether that money is available. If it is available, we tell them to proceed, and we gather the $30 million, or they gather the $30 million for us from the donors. We get that money in the bank. We then only issue roughly 50% of that $30 million in shares. So again, referring to the amounts we just brought in this current raise, we brought in $34 million into our bank account, and for that we only issued around 14.5 million shares, which is less than 8.5% dilution, which is a great outcome for all shareholders, I believe. So hopefully that explains the way flow-through funding works. The reason that we only issue so few shares, roughly half the amount we want to bring in, is because the Canadian government then takes up the rest of that burden. The donors get a very generous tax benefit based on their donation. We issue the shares to a charity of their choice. Now, the charity doesn't want our shares, it wants money. So it issues those shares to our broker, which in this case was Canaccord, and they transfer those shares to a back-end book of our choosing of high-quality institutions, as you would for any other raise. So the money at the back end was $1.22 at this point, and those high-quality institutions received those shares, making ultimately the front-end price $2.37. Hopefully that answers most of the questions about flow-through funding, but I'm happy to take some more after this webinar if you have any live. And then the final thing I'd like to talk about is a few of the updates that are happening on site. I just returned from 3 weeks in Canada, and it was devastating to see the damage that the recent wildfires did to the landscape on all of our properties to some extent. But it was very encouraging to see drilling has recommenced at a great pace. So we've got 3 drill rigs on site as of today. We've got a 4th mobilising later this week. And then within the next fortnight, we'll have our 5th and final rig for the moment on site. I think I updated everyone previously that these are, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, being converted into land-based units to reduce our reliability, or our reliance, I should say, on helicopters. And then we'll be doing a combination of infill drilling to produce our maiden resource, and we'll have 1 drill rig testing new targets that we've got around the Adina area. And all of those drill rigs, I should say, are focused on Adina. We've got exploration teams on the ground at Canset and at Tilly to develop targets there to commence a later drilling program. The other very important activity we conducted while I was on site is to bring our First Nations partners from the Mistissini community, who are the First Nations owners, the traditional owners of the land, not only at Adina, but along the road route we plan to build from Adina north to the Trans-Tyger Highway. We flew the senior members of the Mistissini community over the proposed route in helicopters. They gave the thumbs up for that route, and we see that as one of the key contributors to the approval process that we're now going through for that road. And again, we still hope to have approvals to start constructing that road before the end of the year, which will greatly free up access and further reduce our reliance on helicopters at Adina. Everything's going well on the ground. I look forward to keeping you updated in similar webinars, and thanks again for your time. I'll now take some questions if anyone has any. A number of questions have started coming in. We had a great take-up of enrolments in this webinar, something in excess of 170, I think. So thank you all again for listening. I'm going to follow a similar format to what I did last time and just read the questions straight off the screen that I have in front of me and answer them as best as I can. I'd be interested to hear feedback as part of this, if you think this is the right format, if it suits everyone, if you're getting the information you need from this. The first one that Mark has asked is, in light of some other companies like Patriot displaying visual results recently as part of their drilling, do we intend to do the same thing to keep the market better updated and perhaps more frequent results coming out? I don't think we will on that one. We wait until we've got meaningful results to put out, and by meaningful I mean a good solid batch of results that actually tells a story about the drilling we're doing, either infill or extensional or exploration drilling. Visuals is something we used in the early days, and I think it's a bit more appropriate for a junior company, but as we're fast moving towards a maiden resource, and I keep talking about global significance, and I'm sure that question will come up shortly. I can talk about that a bit more. But as we're moving towards a globally significant resource, it seems almost like it's cheapening the experience. Is maybe that's not the right way to put it. But we prefer to put out solid drill results rather than just visuals. Another question from Jason that talks about with the recent price action of Winsome and the fact that we've fallen substantially. we may be a target for acquisitions. And then he asks, if the company receives an offer, will we be transparent and inform the market whether we think it's acceptable? I think it depends on a number of factors. It depends on who the party is. It depends on whether we think it's a meaningful proposition. It depends if it's at an appropriate, what's considered an appropriate premium to the current market price, and also whether we think as directors we would be recommending it. There's a whole lot of factors. And it also depends on other parties who may or may not be looking at the time. So I'm afraid I can't answer that one directly, rather than say it really depends on the offer, the price, and whether we consider it a substantial offer. Chris has asked, realistically, how long will it take to receive the assays for the extra 15,000 metres desired to be able to calculate and publish a maiden resource? We now, and perhaps to clear up the miscommunication, which was I take responsibility for in the last capital raise. Sorry, not the last capital raise, the last webinar. When I spoke to you last in this forum, I talked about the holes which had gone to, the drill holes which had gone to the lab prior to the evacuation with the fires. And I said results were imminent, which they were. We put out 4 holes very soon after that webinar. The issue that we had was with the rapid evacuation from site when the fires came on board. There was still roughly 9 or 10 holes, or the core from those holes, left on site in the rapid evacuation. And we hadn't managed to do an accurate inventory because everyone had to leave the province almost exclusively because of the fires. So the remaining 10 or so holes that were yet to be assayed, or the assay results come through when we put out our last announcement, they're at the lab now. And again, we expect those to come through fairly soon. But we've been drilling for about 6 weeks on site now. So since post fires, and very frequently, as in at least once a week, I'm getting notification that assays are reaching the lab. So we should, from now on, start to have very regular updates on drilling results as a good solid batch comes through. I think also I talked about SGS setting up a mobile sample prep lab in Radisson. They are continuing with those plans, and it should be installed by the end of October. And we will have first and probably exclusive use of that mobile sample prep lab. I can't remember what I talked about last time, but the mobile sample prep lab makes a lot of sense for us because we take our core, which is very bulky, as you can probably imagine. We drive that a couple of 100 kilometres to Radisson, which is in the James Bay region, almost directly west along the Trans-Tyger Highway from our camp. And the samples are then reduced to very small pulps, which are then shipped to the lab. So it's that sample prep stage that has been holding us up over the last 6 or 8 months. So again, we expect sample times to start coming down and consistent results coming through now. And there was a miscommunication, as I said, about the holes which hadn't reached the lab yet. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but we're pretty confident that we'll put measures in place now for fairly consistent results to come through within about 4 weeks of them reaching the lab. And so then, actually, I reread that question, which I perhaps didn't answer properly. We expect to have the majority of drilling done for our resource by early December, and then we put them in the labs and allow an appropriate time over the Christmas period to receive all our assays back, and then process our maiden resource in Q1 next year. Now, Amit has asked a question about why don't we do a staged resource upgrade. He's saying, for example, release a maiden resource in December at a certain amount and then upgrade it with extra drilling next year. The reason we haven't done that is because there are a lot of examples, recent examples in the market I won't directly point to any of our peers, but I'm sure many of you are aware of them, that I think the market, given the low lithium prices at the moment and the often negative sentiment around, and the realisation that there are a lot of lithium hopefuls, particularly in Canada, mean that unless a resource comes out that is exceptional, that stands out from the crowd, then it's likely to fall flat. So if we put out a resource that isn't exceptional, and my view is below sort of 50 million tonnes, wouldn't really stand out, then I think it might fall flat. And I think the market wouldn't appreciate it. And then it could be another 6-9 months while we live with that, while we do more drilling to upgrade it. So we think that the waiting until we've got a globally significant resource of that size is far better in the long-term interest of shareholders. So then Amit also said, points out with that question that without any numbers, the market's not interested, and then talks about a exploration target. Now, that's an interesting view, and it's certainly one view, although I then get asked by other shareholders the fact that we could be a takeover target. Now, I don't think we can be both. If the market's not interested, then I don't think we're a takeover target. So there's two sides to that. We've got money in the bank now to pursue the exploration we need in the infill drilling to get a world-class resource. So in theory, between now and that point, because we don't need to raise money, the share price itself is not important to our business activities. Now, the share price is always important to us all as shareholders, of course, but it's our job to make sure that we're looking forward and not just to the short-term share price, but to work out how to build real value into the company and ultimately, over the long term, make sure the share price increases. So Dan has then said along the same lines, I've been talking about waiting to release a globally significant resource, and he then says multiple independent modelers suggest Winsome could already release such a maiden resource, perhaps 50 million tonnes, just from assays to date. And can I explain the strategic reasoning for why we're holding off? Hopefully I just explained that, Dan. I think the market's got a sense for what our resource is going to be, given the research that's out. As you point out, there are numerous independent modelers that talk about a somewhere 40 to 60 million tonne maiden resource, given the drilling data to date, which we fully support. But as you know, they don't have all the detailed geological information we have, and we have resource development teams on the job, and we believe that we need some more time in order to put out a resource of that size. But the drilling to date, I agree, as those modelers point out, the drilling to date indicates that we have a maiden resource of that size. There's infill drilling to be done. For example, going between indicated and inferred, or inferred and indicated, approximately needs the change from a 100 by 100 metre grid spacing of drill holes down to 50 by 50. So that's a hell of a lot more drilling in itself. Hans has asked, how confident am I that I'll get the drilling done by the end of the year? I think we're very confident that we'll get the drilling done that we need to put out that globally significant resource in the order that those independent modelers have put out, the research analysts, for example. We need roughly 15,000 metres, as was pointed out by a previous question. We've got, as of the end of this week, we'll have 4 drill rigs operating, which will be drilling 2,000 metres per week. Between them all, last week, the three we had operating as of last week did almost 2,000 metres just with 3 of them. So we're pretty confident, barring a natural disaster, that we'll have that complete by early December, and then we'll be able to send all those assays off to the labs. Bart's asked how the price of lithium will affect us. Well, it doesn't really. I suppose the falling lithium prices has affected everyone's equity price. Our share price has gone down. And so if we were to raise money at the $1.37 we stopped at the other day, then that would cause some dilution that we didn't count on previously. But given we've got the flow through shares and we could raise it almost double that, $2.37, then we minimise dilution to less than 8.5% of the company. So really, now that we've got a lot of cash in the bank, the lithium price in the short term, and it's going to be cyclical as with every other commodity, doesn't really affect us at all. It affects sentiment in the market. It's often harder to get things done if you don't have the money, but we now do have the money to pursue everything we need to. Phil's asked, when are the next assay results due? They are imminent as well. They're starting to flow in from the lab, and within in the very short term, we'll have the next batch of assay results out. Gary's asked about the jackpot exercise was done early. He's asked if that was for the road infrastructure as much as exploration. The reason we did that early is because, number one, we always intended to exercise that option and take on jackpot as our own. But particularly we did it now to make sure it was in our name so that we were eligible to spend the flow through funds we just raised on jackpot. There was some question about if we only had an option over it, we may not have been able to spend that eligible flow through funding on it. Now we still have $30 million of non-flow through in the bank, which we can spend on anything we wish. But nonetheless, that money, as I've talked about, was specifically raised to further our infill maiden resource and exploration drilling, mostly at Adina and by extension jackpot. John's asked that we saw the drills in one of those photos during my webinar presentation, and can I share the location of these drills? Those drills are sitting between the main zone and the footwall zone at Jamar, and they're mostly conducting infill drilling with a little bit of extensional drilling on the out to the east. The fourth rig, which is arriving in a day or so, that'll also be in that same area, conducting infill drilling, working towards our maiden resource. When the fifth rig arrives in about 2 weeks' time, it will remain heli-mounted, and it's going to be testing the gravity and other exploration targets we've got, as well as the ground between that central Jamar deposit and the east and west mineralised intercepts we've got over the 3.1 kilometre strike length. Vincent's asked, do we expect the Canadian government to partly fund the build of the road? Without assuming anything too much, I think the short answer to that is yes. The Grand Alliance, which is a joint venture between the Quebec government and the Cree people, already has plans, as I think I've explained, to put a road basically on the route that we've defined. We refined that route a little bit to avoid watercourses and minimise environmental impacts. And that's what we showed to our Cree partners a couple of weeks ago when I was on site. The construction horizon for them is 6 to 10 years. That doesn't suit us. We want it built by the end of next year. So we're talking to the Grand Alliance, but there's various other government infrastructure funding initiatives that are out there that we think we will be eligible for. And if not us, our Cree partners. So we're running an exercise at the moment through a well-established consulting company in Quebec that seeks out government funding to work out how we can do this. If not, we've got the budget to pay for this progressively over the next 12 or so months, or before the end of next year when we want the all-weather road completed. but we're fairly confident there will be funding of some sort that will contribute towards its construction. Gary's asked, and I suppose this relates to my job here at Winsome, that I'm also on the board of Ascari Metals. And do I have any intention to remove myself from that board? And what are the benefits of being on that board? I don't have any immediate intentions to remove myself from that board. I think it's a managing director being on one other board as a non-executive director is fairly common. The benefits for being on that board are increased exposure to the lithium market. Now, Ascari, not to take away from Winsome here, Ascari has lithium assets in Namibia and Australia. And by being on that board, it allows me to stay in contact with strategic players and other stakeholders in the lithium game from those jurisdictions. And that just increases the network, the exposure that Winsome gets to those people. And keeps me in touch with the industry at the latest developments, technological, exploration, corporate developments. So I think it adds a real benefit being on that board, and certainly doesn't detract from my main job as full-time job as managing director of Winsome. So Brian then says that there appears to be more drilling and assays that will miss the cutoff for the maiden resource, and are we expecting to provide an upgrade? That's a good question, I think, Brian, in that by roughly the 1st of December, beginning of December, we intend to have the cutoff time for assay or for drilling that will contribute towards the maiden resource early next year. But we're going to keep drilling. Now, we have to stop for about 10 days over Christmas, but apart from that, we'll be drilling from now indefinitely throughout virtually all of next year. So there'll certainly be an upgrade next year. And that may coincide with studies we release. It may be that there's two aspects to the upgrade. One is the size, the pure number, and the other one is how much we drag from inferred into indicated in order to support studies. So the drilling will be doing both of those things, expanding the total size of the resource and dragging more into the more certain categories of the JORC code. Danny has asked if the mobile lab in Radisson is taking samples yet, and it's not, but they are in the process of setting it up right now. I spoke to SGS in Val d'Or less than a week ago when we opened our office. And as I said, they're in the process of setting it up. And then Danny also asks, is it going to offset the amount of samples Patriot will be sending? Consider they've got 7 rigs and over 10 soon. As I said, we've got priority use of that SGS lab, and they can expand it if need be. We think with our 5 rigs going indefinitely, well, that does support the lab on its own, but there's still some extra capacity there if they decide to take in other participants like Patriot. Brian's asked approximately how many metres have been drilled since remobilisation. I suppose it's 6 weeks we've been drilling on average with 2 rigs, I'd say, for those 6 weeks, given there was 1 initially and 2 and now 3. Each one is about 500 metres a week. So that's probably 1,000 metres a week for 6 weeks. So there's probably 6,000 or 7,000 metres that's been drilled since we remobilised after the fires. Of course, that's rapidly increasing now. From the end of this week, we'll have 4 rigs concentrating on infill drilling. Phil's asked about an update for CanSet. CanSet is, we've got teams on the ground at the moment doing exploration work. They're checking out visible pegmatites. They're doing some geochem soil analysis. They're investigating the gravity targets we have. And we're also in the process of mobilising a sonic rig to site. Again, this was put back by the fires, unfortunately, but it should be on site soon. And the Sonic rig's great because it manages to take it's a small portable rig, and it takes essentially a core of the glacial till that sits as cover over the pegmatites in the region. And that's great for geochem soil analysis as well. Lithium's fairly mobile, and in that glacial till, particularly at the bottom of it, near where it hits the pegmatite or whatever rock is below it, the levels of lithium in there can indicate the source of, if there is lithium in there, we can determine quite often where the source is and map it back and then target our drilling a bit better. So with all that going on, we'll have targets by the end of the year, and then at some point in the early part of next year, we'll commence drilling again with better targets at Canset. Canset doesn't get much attention these days, but it's certainly not, it certainly sits near the top of our mind, just behind Adina. As I've said many times, it's a big property. There's pegmatites everywhere. We've found that great smallish mineralised area. We've got hints of lithium elsewhere, and it sits only 30 kilometres from Patriot. I'm convinced there's a sleeping giant at Canset. It's just going to come behind sometime next year when we start drilling and make some real discoveries there. Mark's asked a question, and this sort of highlights perhaps the disparate thinking that often comes in with the publication of the resource. So Mark's saying that we've noted that we're going to be drilling throughout next year, even after we publish our maiden resource. So Mark said, why don't we delay and put an even bigger resource out? That there always needs to be a line in the sand drawn. To my mind, as I said before, there are lots of lithium projects out there. In fact, there's lithium fatigue in the markets, particularly amongst fund managers, and that partly contributes to everyone's share price going down. So we really need to stand out from the many that are out there. In my mind, 50 million tonnes is a standout point, and we've decided that something above that is globally significant, and that's what we'd like to publish. Now, we could wait and get above that. We look at the analyst reports, as I'm sure all you have, and their upside is somewhere around 100 million tonnes, but we could be waiting most of next year to get somewhere near that. So we're drawing a line in the sand, calling a certain amount above 50 million tonnes globally significant, and that's what we're aiming for. Alex has asked, with 70 million worth of cash, can we have additional drill rigs exploring the north, south, east and west while doing the infill? Yes, one rig will be doing that, and our short-term plans are just to have the 5 on site. But one of the important things we're doing is we're upgrading our camp. The Mirage Lodge, where roughly half of our workforce is currently housed and where many of Patriot's workforce is housed, has been sold, and we understand it's likely to be taken off the public market next year sometime. So our camp, which we're calling the Winsome Logistics Base, or Cargare as it was traditionally known, we're expanding that from 20 to 60 rooms as we speak. That should be complete by early December, and we'll then have a bit of flexibility to increase our workforce or increase the number of drills if we need to. I'll answer a couple more questions because we're sort of running out of time. Amit has asked, are there any developments on the road being built? And the government sort of answered that question already, I think. Chris has asked, can I talk about the potential of what was revealed on the ground by the bushfires on our properties? Although it was very devastating, and hopefully you got a sense of it in one of those pictures that I showed during the talk, what it has done is it has exposed many pegmatites. So a lot of pegmatites are very near the surface, almost at surface, but covered by moss and other vegetation. That's now been cleared in many cases. So we've actually got satellite imagery over Canset, Adina, Jackpot and Tilly to post fires, and that's really pointed out some of the pegmatite outcrops, because it's very difficult even in a helicopter to cover those all of that ground adequately and map those pegmatites. So the satellite imagery has done that, and that's what's informing the field work that's now going on at, well, all properties, Adina, Cansett and Tilly. They'll slowly be mapped and checked, ground truthed, and again, they should lead to more drill targets. Chris has asked, can I talk about the potential for stacked pegmatites in the Adina deposit? Does this extend into Jackpot? We see gravity targets moving to the north of the footwall zone, which we intend to investigate in the coming months with our 5th drill rig. They could well be pegmatites. The gravity low indicates that they're not country rock, so we hold out a lot of hope for those moving north. But as they're moving north, that's towards the Jackpot property, of course. And we recently did some other geophysical surveys, which laid on top of that gravity survey gives us a lot of targets. North is one of the areas we'll be investigating with that 5th drill rig, and ideally they'll move into Jackpot, we don't know yet. But Jackpot also provides a great piece of ground to put infrastructure, which we're doing at the moment as part of our studies, planning where the infrastructure is going to go. Leonardo's asked, do I believe banking reports that supply responses come online much faster than expected, pushing the market into an earlier and longer than expected surplus? I don't see any, off the top of my head, I can't think of any supply response that's come on quickly. Everyone is generally delayed, and even relatively simple hard rock projects have trouble expanding. Brownfield projects have trouble expanding. So I don't see that. And again, I keep going back to one of the reference points I have is the continued strategic interest we get from end users of lithium. They certainly don't see any surplus in the coming 5 years. And we're being hounded all the time by various strategic players to try and ultimately get our offtake. Of course, we're not going to give that away too early, and our target's the maiden resource early next year, but the interest is undiminished from these parties. So they don't see it, and I certainly don't see it either. I'll answer one more from Amit, saying there are a few people spreading rumours that many of the top 20 holders are selling out. Is that correct? No, it's not correct at all. The movement in the last 3 or 4 months for top 20 is 1% or so, and top 30 it's less than 1%, 0.8 I think it is, in the last 3 or 4 months for the top 30. So I know Hot Copper boys love to get on there, and we've got some people who aren't our fans on Hot Copper. But perhaps my closing remark would be maybe everyone should save themselves some heartache and heartburn and not refer to Hot Copper as much as everyone seems to. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Again, I'll be conducting these fairly regularly, particularly at notable news events. Thank you all for your time this morning, and particularly thank you for the questions. And if anyone's got any feedback on this format or what else you'd like to see, please leave them in the comments and we'll take those on board. Thank you.